Imagine there was a man named Fred, and Fred's neighbors started getting worried and a little bit upset because there was this horrible smell coming from Fred's house, specifically Fred's basement. And it turns out when the police came over to investigate, it turns out that they were shocked to find out that Fred has been torturing puppies in his basement. Indeed, his basement's filled with puppy carcasses. For the past 26 weeks or so, Fred has been mutilating these puppies in his basement. He's been doing all kinds of terrible, horrible things to them. Things like cutting off their noses, cutting off their paws. And he's been doing all of this without any sort of anesthetics at all. So they've been feeling all of this pain and this suffering, all the while that he's been doing this. In addition to that, he's been keeping them in his basement in nothing but filth and feces until he's ready to slaughter them. So that's the picture I want you to imagine. That's the case that we're trying to think about, to begin with here. Let's call this case Fred's basement. Now, hopefully you're quite upset by this sort of case. Hopefully, like the general public would be, you would be outraged to find out that this was occurring in Fred's basement, that Fred was torturing these puppies for the last 26 weeks or so, doing all these horrible, insanely terrible things, causing so much pain and suffering to these puppies. And so, of course, Fred is charged with animal abuse, with abusing and torturing these puppies, and he's taken away to jail, as we would hope that he would be. But what exactly is Fred's defense? What can he do to defend this terrible behavior of torturing puppies in his basement? Well, Fred claims that he's not a sadist. That's not why he's doing this. He does not get pleasure from torturing the puppies. That's not why he's doing this. In fact, he would prefer not to have to torture the puppies at all. But what he ends up telling the police officers in his defense is that a few years back, he was in a car accident. And in this car accident, let's suppose that it caused some sort of damage to what he's calling the Godiva gland. And this damage to the Godiva gland that was a result of this car accident, it means that he can no longer experience the pleasure and the joy of eating chocolate. So let's call this the Godiva gland defense. So essentially, this Godiva gland defense is a way of comparing what he does with what we do when we eat animals, just to kind of give you a heads up of what's going on here. So Fred basically says, I was in this car accident, and as a result of the car accident, it's damaged this Godiva gland, which means that I can no longer get any pleasure from eating chocolate. But here's the thing. He came across a doctor who had recently discovered that by torturing puppies, he's actually able to produce a particular hormone that would then allow him to once again experience the pleasure of eating chocolate. So by torturing the puppies, he's able to produce a particular hormone that we're calling cocamone. So this hormone that's produced by the puppies only happens when you torture them. You have to torture them in just the right way, or else this hormone of cocamone will not be produced. But if you do torture the animals, these puppies, these poor puppies, if you torture them just the right way, then you're able to get the cocamone hormone, which then would allow Fred to once again have this wonderful experience of eating chocolate. Now, unfortunately, there are no legal methods of obtaining this cocamone hormone. There's no other way to do it that's available to Fred except for through torturing these puppies. And so he argues to the police officers in his defense, that his life would be impoverished in some way, that his life would not be as significant and as meaningful as it would be if he was unable to have the chocolate. Because his Godiva gland was damaged, his life really kind of went downhill. He got depressed and he was not living a meaningful and significant life. But now that he once again can experience the pleasure of eating chocolate, his life once again has significance and meaning. Of course, he does make it very clear that he would prefer to be able to get the cocamone hormone without torturing the puppies. That's not something he enjoys doing. He doesn't want to torture the puppies. It's just that it's necessary for him to obtain this cocomone, which he needs in order to experience the pleasures of chocolate. And of course, he also reasons that the puppies are just animals. They're not human beings, right? Puppies, they're nothing different than a pig or a cow or, maybe some chickens or fish, right? They're animals, and so what's the difference? Now, I think what Norcross is aiming at when he introduces Fred's basement as this case that he wants to consider, I think he's aiming at you feeling the reaction that most people would, which is that this is terrible. This is a horrible, horrible thing. So that's the moral judgment. The moral judgment here is that what Fred does is morally wrong. Right? There's just something terrible about these actions. There's something morally wrong, right? That's our moral intuition. That's our initial moral judgment that I think Norcross is aiming for. That's exactly what he wants you to feel. The way that Norcross puts it in the reading is that no decent person would ever contemplate torturing puppies in order to have this sort of gustatory experience of the pleasure of eating chocolate. So let's make sure we note that too, right? The pleasure of chocolate is not justification for what Fred does, right? Again, he says no decent person would ever use this as justification. No, that seems entirely correct. Just think about yourself, right? Would you ever justify torturing puppies so that you could experience chocolate? That just seems absurd. And that's exactly what Norcross is hoping you would also agree with, right? That's the moral judgment, the moral intuition that he's banking on you having when he introduces this case.